The new college baseball rankings are out, and there are so many changes to talk about. Every single team except for 2 are in a different spot than they were last week, which includes 4 new teams entering and 4 teams dropping out. For the background video, I'm going to display full series highlights for Florida State this past weekend against Notre Dame, as the Seminoles are finally in the top 25. The question is, how high are they ranked? UC Santa Barbara is one of 2 teams to stay idle in the rankings, as they remain at 25 following a very impressive 3-game sweep of Long Beach State. UC Irvine drops a couple spots to number 24 in this week's D1 Baseball Top 25. It looked like they were going to clinch a series sweep over UC Davis until they allowed an 8-run comeback in the 9th inning of Game 3, which lowered their record for the week to 2-2. Auburn stays in the rankings at 23, despite getting swept by Vanderbilt, who later on you'll see is one of the biggest risers of the week. The Tigers now head home to face Arkansas, so if they want to stay in the rankings for next week, they're going to have to earn it. One of the bigger surprises of this week's rankings is Campbell, who falls 1 spot to 22 despite going 4-0. They've produced double-digit runs in 5 straight games, scoring a total of 72 runs over that stretch. Mississippi State enters the rankings at number 21 after taking 2 of 3 from LSU. When making my series predictions last week, I picked that series as one that would be very difficult for the Tigers, though I'll admit I still had them picked to win it. I was very impressed by State this weekend. It's great to see them playing good baseball again, and I'm excited to see what this team can do throughout the rest of the season. Before getting to the top 20, I think I should go over the teams that have dropped from the rankings. NC State went 0-4 last week, including getting swept at Georgia Tech, and they fell all the way from 13th to unranked. Also dropping out is South Carolina, who lost 2 of 3 to an Ole Miss team that's still unranked, but knocking on the door. Texas and Texas Tech, who not too long ago faced each other as ranked opponents, also fell out of the rankings. Okay, back to the top 25. North Carolina dropped 5 spots after losing 2 of 3 at Miami, who is still unranked despite back-to-back series wins over teams who had been ranked in the top 15. I feel like those 3 midweek losses are what's keeping the Canes out for now. North Carolina still sits at 4-2 in conference play, but has to face a Georgia Tech team this weekend who's playing really well right now. We stay in the ACC for number 19 as Virginia Tech has entered the rankings. They're 5-1 through 2 conference series and are averaging just under 10 runs a game in conference play so far. TCU dropped to 18 after getting swept at home by Oklahoma, who enters the rankings at 17. I'm really surprised to see the Horned Frogs sitting at just 1-5 in conference play. 2 weeks ago they looked like a definite top 10 team, but they've come back down to earth since then. They'll look to get back on track next week against Oklahoma State, while Oklahoma and their perfect 6-0 conference record will host West Virginia. I should note that the Sooners did drop a midweek game against Oklahoma State, but that one is considered as a non-conference rivalry game. It's similar to how Ole Miss and Mississippi State play a non-conference midweek game every year as well. The preseason number 1 ranked Wake Forest Demon Deacons fell all the way to 16th after dropping another series. I'm very surprised to see this team struggle. I was very high on them coming into the season, and even last week I picked them to sweep Virginia. Now, I still think they're going to go far this season. While they're losing games, it doesn't feel like they're getting beat, if that makes sense. A lot of their losses are games that they gave away either by making errors, walking a ton of batters, or some combination of the two. What's promising is the way their offense has been able to put up crooked numbers on the scoreboard. This team honestly reminds me a lot of Tennessee from last year, who ended up making it to Omaha despite a lot of struggles earlier on. I expect to see Wake turn things around, but I certainly didn't see them starting just 2-4 in conference play. Dallas Baptist responded well after losing a midweek against TCU by sweeping Texas A&M Corpus Christi as they move up 4 spots to number 15. Virginia moves up to 14 after taking the series over Wake Forest, which included a dramatic game-tying home run with 2 outs and 2 strikes in the 9th inning of Game 3. There's definitely still questions about their pitching, as they're giving up over 10 runs a game through 2 conference series, but there's no doubt about the strength of their offense. They head to Pittsburgh next week, who is probably still in shock over Kenny Pickett getting traded to the Eagles. I'm a Steelers fan and I'm still in disbelief. Coastal Carolina continues to impress as they move up to number 13 after a 3-1 week that included a 17-9 win over Wake Forest in the midweek. Coming in at number 12 is the Florida State Seminoles. They're finally ranked. Honestly, I think this happened at least 1 week too late. This is not a team that deserved to stay unranked all throughout their perfect 18-0 start to the season. They went into Gainesville last week and took down the Gators on Tuesday and followed it up with a sweep over Notre Dame in their first conference series of the season. They have a huge test coming up this weekend though, as a road series with Clemson awaits them. I'm going to say this right now. If next Monday we're still talking about an undefeated Florida State team, I see no reason why they shouldn't be ranked at number 1. Nothing against any of the teams currently ranked ahead ahead of them, but if you start off 22-0, which would include 4 road wins over top 5 teams, you don't deserve to have anyone ranked above you. Alabama went 2-2 last week, but moves up 3 spots to number 11. The week got off to a shaky start for them, as they dropped in midweek to Southern Miss, who stays unranked but is another team that's not too far off, and then followed that up with an 11-3 loss against Tennessee in their first game of conference play. However, they responded with back-to-back wins over the Vols to secure a top 5 series victory. They head to Georgia next week for their first road conference series of the season. Before getting to the top 10, I'm going to make some rapid-fire series predictions for the upcoming weekend. Here we go. I have Arkansas over Auburn, Wake Forest over Louisville, Mississippi State upsets the Aggies on the road, Duke over NC State, Bama over Georgia, Tennessee over Ole Miss in a tight series, South Carolina bounces back with a close series win at home against Vandy, Clemson takes a ranked matchup against Florida State, LSU wins a top 10 matchup with Florida, and Oregon State takes down Washington. 10 series predictions this week after I went 5-3 in my 8 from last week. Okay, now the top 10 teams in the country. East Carolina improved to 14-4 on the season after going 4-0 last week, and will go on the road this week for all 4 games, which includes the beginning of conference play against UTSA. They're on a 7-game winning streak, but hold just a 4-3 record on the road, so this will be a good test for them. Duke drops 3 spots to number 9 after losing a really entertaining series with Clemson. That series basically played out how I expected it to. I picked the Tigers in last week's video to win a really close series, and that's how it ended up playing out. These are both really good teams, and they're both deserving of a top 10 ranking. Duke will face NC State this weekend looking to bounce back from their first series loss of the season. Tennessee drops down to number 8 after losing 2 of 3 at Alabama. This series kind of opened some concerns about a Tennessee team that had entered with just 1 loss on the season. I thought they'd be the team to come away with the series win, and they were 4 outs away from doing so in Game 3, but you gotta be able to close out wins. I just feel like they're missing that fire or that spark that we've seen from Tennessee teams in past years. Obviously, it's very early and this is just 1 series, so I'm not going to overreact to it, but this upcoming weekend is a pretty good test to see how they bounce back. A home series against a currently unranked Ole Miss team looking to pull off back-to-back ranked series wins. And don't overlook that midweek with a sneaky good Xavier team either. Texas A&M suffered their first setback of the season as they dropped their first 2 games of the year in Gainesville against Florida. That was another really good series, and either team could have won it. They face Mississippi State this weekend, and I'm going to say the same thing that I said about State last week when they were playing LSU. Don't overlook this team. They are a really tough opponent. I feel bad for ultimately picking against them last week, and I don't want to make the same mistake this time around. Let's see if the Aggies can prove me wrong. The Gators move up to number 6 after a 2-2 week that included a midweek loss against Florida State to go along with the series win over A&M. I can already see the comments on this video about them. How can a 12-7 team be ranked in the top 10? They're not that good. They're overrated. Let me say this. They still haven't lost a weekend series, unless you count that 1 game against St. John's. They have a solid RPI, and they have a very strong strength of schedule. This is a very good baseball team. I mean, they just took 2 against Texas A&M, who was 18-0 and ranked 4th. They have the likely Golden Spikes Award winner on their team, and they know how to win when they need to the most. Yeah, they bend a little, they have their off nights here and there, but baseball is about winning series, which they've been able to do. By the end of the season, the record that will matter most is how they do in their 30 SEC games, and so far they're off to a good start. It should be a really fun series between them and LSU this weekend at the box. Speaking of the Tigers, they dropped down to number 5 after a 3-2 week. I've said it about this team before, and I'll say it again. They look vulnerable. There's no way they were going to produce what happened last year, but so far the offense just hasn't clicked yet, and the pitching depth looks a little thinner than it seemed when coming into the season. I'm not going to sound the alarms about LSU just yet, since they've only lost the 1 series on the road in a tough environment to play in, but this series with Florida coming up is a really big one for them. Looking at their schedule, things can get away from them pretty quick if they don't start playing better. After facing Florida, they have a road series against Arkansas, a home series with Vandy, and then go back on the road to face Tennessee. It doesn't get much easier after that either. I'm excited to see how this LSU team responds to adversity. Entering the top 5 and moving up 6 spots is the Clemson Tigers. I was really impressed by them this weekend against Duke. After dropping the first game, they responded with 2 close wins to secure the series win on the road. They have another big test this weekend against Florida State, which should be a fun series to watch. They're the 3rd different team to be the highest ranked ACC team in the last 3 weeks, so it'll be interesting to see if they can put a pause to that trend of turnover at the top. Vanderbilt also jumps up 6 spots as they're now ranked number 3 in the country. When they sat at 5-3, there were a lot of questions being asked about them. 13 straight wins are a great way to respond to that. The starting pitching has been phenomenal. The offense, despite some key injuries, has continued to produce at a high level, and the bullpen has looked a lot better lately. When you think about it, the only thing standing between this team and a 21-0 record with the number 1 ranking is 3 bad innings early on, when they were still trying to figure out the best roles for a lot of their new players. It's early, but they look to be even better than last year's team that won the SEC Tournament Championship. And before you ask, Wheels, if you're going to say all this about Vandy, why did you pick them to lose this weekend against South Carolina? That would be a fair question, by the way. My answer would be that baseball is a tough game to predict, but my gut feeling is that South Carolina, in front of big crowds at home, looking to bounce back from a tough series loss, is going to have a little extra motivation to avoid starting conference play with back-to-back series losses. Plus, Vandy is going to have to lose again at some point, probably. Regardless of my upcoming predictions, one thing is for sure. This is a really good team that could very easily be in that number 1 spot if the top 2 teams drop a series. Speaking of the top 2 teams, moving into the number 2 spot is Oregon State, who started Pac-12 play with a road series win over Utah. They scored 5 runs in the 9th inning of Game 1 to come back from a 5-2 deficit, but ended up losing Game 3 after going up 9-0 through 3 innings. Now I know you may ask, Wheels, why didn't you make any highlights for these games? Unfortunately, Game 1 wasn't televised at all, and the next 2 games were only streamed with 1 camera angle. Hopefully we can get some better streams put out soon for them so I could show you coverage of this team, because they are really good. Staying in the number 1 spot is the Arkansas Razorbacks. This team just looks automatic. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but their pitching is unhittable and their lineup continues to look strong. They outscored Missouri this past weekend 23-1 across their 3-game sweep and are on a 13-game winning streak. It's not going to be easy to knock this team out of the number 1 spot. And that should just about do it for another week of college baseball rankings. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.